One thing I learned in being an athlete or a sportsman, as you say, is to have a reasonably short memory for pain. And that's not to say you don't acknowledge your mistakes and learn from them, but you don't want to dwell on them. And so if you lose a game, you want to learn from that, take those lessons and apply them to the next game, but come in with a fresh, positive attitude, not worrying about what you screwed up on last time.
So, welcome to the Leaders in Real Estate podcast. I'm your host, Nick Carman, and I hope this podcast proves to be your mentor in your pocket. Now, we're going to talk about challenges, obstacles, and the benefits of leadership through the lens of today's guest. So, today I'm joined by Matt Tucker, CEO and Co-CIO of Bridge Net Lease at Bridge Investment Group. Now, Matt spent his career leading billions in real estate investment, building teams, co-founding new verticals within Bridge. And before that, he was with Gladstone Commercial Corp, JP Morgan, SG Capital, and Liquid Realty Partners. He's a Princeton alum, 3 times NCAA champion in Lacrosse, and someone whose colleagues and teammates consistently point out as a quietly confident, empowering leader. So Matt, thanks very much for joining us.
Nick, it's great to be here, and thanks for inviting me on.
Pleasure's all mine. So let's get us started, shall we? If we wind the clock a little bit back, tell us a little bit about sort of your background, Matt. Tell us where it all began.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in the Detroit area in the Midwest, and Detroit is the Motor City. So when I was a kid, I had friends whose parents did 3 things. They either worked for the big 3 automotive companies. My dad was a lawyer, so I knew what that was all about. My mom sold real estate. She was a real estate agent. And then I played sports and got myself knocked up a few times. And so I knew about doctors. And so I didn't have a big, broad view of the world, but I knew when I was driving around in the backseat of my mom's car and she was showing houses, and part of what she did throughout my upbringing and my twin sister's upbringing was help lead buying, renovating, and flipping homes. And we always lived in those homes. And so I kind of lived in a construction site and always had an interest in real estate. I also, as already noted, I played a lot of sports. And so being in a team environment is really familiar to me, whether that's being in the middle of an intense game or in the locker room, having fun with my friends. Team environments are always where I feel like I'm most comfortable. After kind of proceeding through high school and looking out in looking where I was going to go next, I had the opportunity to go to Princeton. I had been a high school All-American lacrosse player and was recruited by a number of schools. And when I told my mom Princeton was interested in me coming, she said, if that works out, you're going to go to Princeton because it's the best school on the list of folks who are looking at you. And coincidentally, in 1992, the year before I was selecting a school, Princeton had won its first national championship in the modern era in lacrosse. And so it was a bit of a no-brainer for me to choose Princeton. I was really fortunate that Bill Tierney, the coach there, found me in Michigan, which was not a big lacrosse environment compared to some of the East Coast cities where at the time it was a big sport. And so I landed at Princeton in the fall of '93 and then started my journey as an adult from there.
Well, we're gonna dive into sort of what's affected your career and what probably shaped Matt Tucker, the leader now. But let's take a moment just to establish what are you responsible for now with Bridge Net Lease.
Sure. Yeah. So at Bridge Investment Group, I'm a senior managing director of Bridge Investment Group, and then I run the Bridge Net Lease vertical with my partner Brandon Flickinger. I'm the CEO, and Brandon and I are the co-CIOs. So we set investment strategy for the vertical. We lead the investment committee. We lead our team together. And as CEO, I take more of a role in strategy, investor relations, and investor communications. And so it's everything from building the team to reviewing and approving the investments that our team is making, staying on top of our portfolio of investments, talking to investors about the merits of investing in our strategy, and then investing that capital wisely and being a good steward of dollars over the long term.
Okay, interesting. Really interesting. So let's dive in a little bit to your background. Yeah, let's put together just a few more of those steps on that career path. Now, the guys who listen to this series will be very familiar that we like to do a little bit of digging. So I managed to speak to one of your Princeton alumni, someone who knew you very, very well at the time, and someone who was in the same lacrosse team with you. Now, I asked them just to shed a little bit of light on sort of who Matt was. Now, so they explained that clearly you were an excellent sportsman, and you've gone on then to achieve these three quite incredible sort of national championships. But despite that sort of natural talent, he did say it wasn't all plain sailing. And whilst this is a real estate sort of pod than a sporting pod, I thought it'd be worthwhile just touching on that really, just to see how that shaped you as an individual and whether that's played a part in your style of leadership today.
Yeah, Nick, it's a great question. And my teammate and friend who you spoke with and I had a similar experience. We both had a lot of success in as athletes prior to getting to Princeton. And as you noted, we had great success while at Princeton. But we were coming in as freshmen, our classmates and teammates were also all among the best players in the country at the time. And so we immediately jumped into kind of a healthy, natural competition with each other that has kind of developed into this brotherhood that we still carry through today. I'm sure before we get off the recording of this podcast, I'm going to have a half a dozen texts from these guys from my class who we all arrived in Princeton, New Jersey as 18-year-olds together. Our coach, a guy named Bill Tierney, is still considered one of the legends of coaching in lacrosse. And Coach T, as we called him, was a tough coach. I think that his coaching style evolved over the years. But when we were there, it was tough love 24/7. And so he held us to a very high standard. And for some of us, including myself, I had a very positive and offensively minded high school coach. And Coach Tierney was certainly hard on his players and played a very defensive kind of game. And so I had to learn to fit into a new system, had to learn to be more of a supporting cast player than the star of the team. And also as kind of a young adult, I had to learn how to manage the opportunity to play Division I sports, which was a 3 or 4 or 5 hour a day commitment all year round with a highly rigorous academic environment at Princeton. Where, as I noted before, I knew of just a few professions that I could potentially be as I progressed through. So I entered Princeton and started in the pre-med program, and Princeton grades on a curve. And I was in freshman chemistry with about 200 other kids, and I think my final grade was 87%. Well, at Princeton, that's a C on the curve. And so I had to wake up pretty quick to a really competitive environment, not only in the sporting world, but in the academic world. And I think that level of intensity is something that has really helped shape my work ethic today. I'd characterize it as grittiness. I think developing a sense of grit is really important for success for anybody in any business or any line of work. You have to be persistent. You have to work through challenges. You have to work through those times when it's hard and when it's cold outside in the spring and you're wearing 5-year-old heavy sweatpants that are issued by the athletic department, not your modern athletic gear that everybody has today, soaking wet. That's a tough environment. And then you have to get off the field and go eat dinner and go study and get your work done for a couple hours. So it was a rigorous and challenging environment. We had a heck of a lot of fun and we had a lot of success, but I think the biggest thing I took from my experience at Princeton, both as an athlete and as a student, was learning how to develop that sense of grit and work ethic. And that's something I kind of carried with me, this idea that you always have to improve if you want to succeed in whatever you're doing. You have to think about whatever periodic interval, I think about it at least once a month. What if some hotshot came in and wanted my job? What do I need to improve today so that I'm going to be at the head of the pack and can do what I'm doing today better than the best people out in the world? And I take that from my experience at Princeton.
Okay, so very quickly then, Matt, given those two differing coaches' philosophies, what works better in real estate today, defense or offense?
I think you have to have a balanced strategy. The real estate world was very exciting until the end of 2021. We had a long and very fruitful run while interest rates ran down. And it was an easy environment to be aggressive and offensive. And I think as we proceeded to the peak of the market, those groups who've, I think, been successful through this more challenging period in real estate successfully balanced that being aggressive, putting money to work, and being defensive and not getting over their skis. And so the way that's been helpful for us is when we joined Bridge, our timing was good. We joined in 2011 and we began really executing the strategy in the latter half of 2021. I think I misspoke earlier and said 2011. I meant 2021. And then we've been investing really through what's been a bit of a down cycle as we've seen pricing fall and pricing then stabilize, fundamentals weaken a bit. And we're now in an environment where we see opportunity, I think, with the Fed in the US cutting rates, pricing having stabilized, fundamentals having stabilized. At the same time, we have the trade war uncertainty, and we invest a lot in the industrial sector. And so we have to balance the desire to grow and be aggressive and offensive with keeping a defensive posture. And the strategy that I help run, the net lease strategy, is really an income oriented, somewhat defensive strategy that should perform in good markets and bad markets because you have long-term leases with credit-worthy tenants. And so we've had to be, when we like an opportunity, we get aggressive and try to win that opportunity. But we, at the same time, have to be defensive, underwrite that opportunity well, do our due diligence, and be thorough in that, and have an open conversation when we run into risks. And I think where you can get into trouble by being overly aggressive or offensive is if you put your blinders on to risks or things that you uncover during due diligence in the desire to grow. And so I really think you got to balance both sides of it.
Okay, so let's get ourselves into the second chapter. Let's talk a little bit about leadership. Let's talk about your journey into leadership. So when did you have the first chance to really lead people in your career?
Somewhat early on in my career, I did have the opportunity to lead small teams, but it was just teams of one or two people. And I tried to provide kind of clear guidance and clear expectations as part of that.
Did you feel ready?
I'm not sure anybody's fully ready the first time they are given leadership responsibility. I think that taking on leadership responsibility is a challenge for a lot of producers who are really narrowly focused on what their personal goals are. And I think that transition is tricky for a lot of people. And it didn't come naturally at first, but I think some of my experiences helped that transition along the way.
So talking sort of my personal experience and from listening to your peers when I've been sort of privileged to be in this position, is that I think sort of leadership is often it's the realization of I can't do this on my own, and yes. I now need others' help. But that in itself, I think, is a key difference. That's a gear change, isn't it? From what's got you to this point to what's going to get you to that next point. So, yeah, I would like to know then, how easy is it to let go? From the Matt who was crushing it in his team, who's got the tap on his shoulder, to say, right, you're now ready for leadership. How quickly or how easily did you learn to let go?
I think that's a process, and the way that I've learned to let go is by building a team that I can trust. And so it's a two-way street in learning to let go. You have to have people that you can rely on and trust. And so you have to hold those people accountable. So I'm not sure I think letting go is the right term, but I think you have to trust and then hold people to account for the goals that you set for them. And so it's a different kind of work than it is being a producer, where you're really kind of self-driven and pushing forward for yourself, relying on yourself all the time. But letting go, I don't think as a leader you really can let go. You have to be on top of the details, but you have to trust the people who are working for you to deliver.
Yeah, I agree. I think to be, that individual in that producer phase of their career can get away with being pretty selfish.
Yes.
Sometimes not being the best teammate. But the gears and the sort of pressures really change, I think, when you get into leadership. And that probably is quite a nice segue then to bring in a little bit more of our research. So I got to speak to your co-CIO, Brandon, and I asked him a little bit about who Matt is and his styles. So I'll quote him now, because he described you as Matt is not just an investor; he's a builder. Co-founding the sort of net lease sort of vertical and bringing the innovation to what is quite a conservative capital raising sort of strategy space was really innovative. Now, I'd like to just spend a little bit of time now just unpicking exactly what is that. What is the difference then that you and your team are doing today? Give me a bit of a flavor of that.
I think what Brandon is referring to there is that I've always been interested in building a business that I have real ownership in. And we had that opportunity when we joined Bridge as partners. And the investing part that I think Brandon is referring to is that day-to-day deal work, which I've always found very interesting and engaging, tying to this theme I mentioned earlier of doing things that you're naturally inclined to do. It's very project oriented. You identify a property, go through the process of bidding, due diligencing, and closing, and then in a lot of cases you can move on to the next one. I think building is the full process of building a business. And so in our case, that is making those investments, but it's building the team. It's putting processes in place so that you have good management tools, so that those people that you trust and put in the field to do the work for you, you can hold them accountable because you have good management tools. It's looking for new and innovative structures for investment vehicles. And so in our partnership, mine with Brandon, I focus a lot on what I just talked about. How can we improve our processes? How can we look for new opportunities with investors? How can we look to apply the expertise we built over a long period of time, investing in what a lot of folks think of as a pretty vanilla asset class, long-term leased assets to credit-worthy businesses, and do it in a little different way where we can make a little bit more for our investors, and by taking what we think is probably a little less risk. So, we look at opportunities where there is opportunities to expand buildings, where we might have opportunity for some development projects. And these are a little outside of the box in the net lease space. And it served us well with the portfolio we built. And we'll always keep an eye on being creative, pushing forward.
Okay, let's think about internally or externally now, Matt. What do you think is the number one trait for you to look into when you're considering sort of the emerging leaders today? What are you looking for?
What I'm mostly looking for there is competence. So having the skills and grit. Real estate is an engaging and challenging business, but it's not rocket science. It requires first and foremost competence in the skills. So understanding your analytical tools, understanding markets, understanding research. But more than anything, it's getting out of bed and showing up every day and doing the work and picking up the phone and calling people and having the discipline just to keep going every day. And that may sound very mundane, but I think it's really important to just show up and get the work done. And as a young person, I think one way to communicate upward is to do that. Get to work before your boss and communicate. Send those kind of physical messages by being there in person that you are there to get the work done. And then as a leader, do the same thing. I try to be in the office early. I try to be here. I think that in today's post-COVID environment where a lot of people are working from home, I'm grateful that our team has a culture of working in the office together because I think we can communicate better. We see each other. I mentioned earlier we have this Friday lunch every week, and it gives us the opportunity to be together so that junior people can learn from senior people. As I look for emerging leaders, it's first and foremost, do they have the skills, the basic skills to then hold people accountable to execute those skills? And two, do they have the grit to show up every day, make and communicate hard decisions? And that's an evolution that you can observe. And some people can get through to the other side, and some people have some challenges doing that.
We've talked a bit about grit. Is that something you can learn? If anyone
I think so.
if someone listening to this is thinking that I'm not sure that's one of my strengths, what's your advice to them on that?
I think it is something that you can develop. I think some people naturally are built with grit in their DNA, but I also think that you can teach yourself grit or develop it. The way that I think about that is that I have personal goals, and I think about what I need to get to the other side for those personal goals, family goals, things like that. And to me, that's grit's a big part of that. And so it's whenever you think about taking a little break during the middle of the day, or maybe your focus wanders, it's the discipline to get back into it and keep going and keep pushing forward.
Yeah,
And
I agree with that. I think just recognizing sort of why you're doing something as well, I think is incredibly important.
Yes, absolutely.
So on that sort of, what's your why, Matt? What drives you?
Well, my why is my family. I just celebrated 20 years with my wife, and just shortly after celebrating my 50th birthday. And so this is a nice time to kind of reflect on the why. I have 2 kids. I've got great relationships with my parents. My wife sadly lost her father, and having good bonds with my family and the opportunity to share experiences until I'm an old person is really what drives me. And
Not money, not title.
well, you need financial resources and wherewithal to do what I just described. And so, sure,
I just warn you. HR might be listening, so I don't want to sort of suggest this. This is completely voluntary,
so,
Matt.
No, not at all. So it's that's a big part of it. To meet those goals, I have the personal ambition then to do well in my career, and doing well means making some money.
Do you think there's good and bad drivers? Again, thinking about our audience, those guys who are a little younger.
Yeah.
Frankly, those guys who've got less money, they are lower on that career ladder. Do you think there are positive and negative drivers?
I do. And this is something my partner Brandon and I talk about a lot. As a producer, a lot of successful producers are very financially driven, and that's why those financial incentives are in place. But the worst deals that you can do are the ones where your producers are trying to sell the investment committee that it's a good deal, rather than having a good, disciplined debate about the merits of the deal. And so as a leader managing producers, you really have to look out for that. And as a producer, one of the hardest things about transitioning from being a producer to a leader is reconciling that you might have to not do a deal to be successful. You might have to say no and not get that immediate reward, or if you have a compensation structure that rewards you for doing deals, the best decision might be to say no. And that's hard. And I think that's one of the hardest things that producers need to learn to make that jump to leadership, where you have real responsibility for the outcomes.
Okay. Sticking on the topic of mentoring, what's someone listening to this now, what would you suggest them is the best resource, the best book? Obviously, we know the best podcast series, but whatever it might well be, Matt, what would you suggest these guys go out and pick up to develop some of the skills we've touched on today?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I would just say read a lot. and listen to a lot of podcasts. There's so much good content out there on the business world generally, on real estate specifically, and try to listen to a lot of different things so you get different points of view so you can take those in and develop your own point of view, because that's what's going to be really valuable. If you end up in an echo chamber here or there, you're not bringing anything new to the table. So try to take in as much as you can. To get specific, a book that I read, and then this is the only book I've ever given to teammates or partners, is Principles by Ray Dalio. And I downloaded the PDF of Principles off the Bridgewater website a long time ago, before it was an actual book published in the bookstores. And a few things really struck me about the guidance from Ray Dalio. And it's one, radical transparency. And I think about this in finding out what the truth is. And that, means you have to be clear-headed. You have to get the right group of people in the room and kind of cut through the noise to get to what's really happening. And different motivations, different compensation structures, all this stuff can get in the way of that. The other part, and it kind of dovetails, is getting to the right answers. And I think by being transparent, by being truthful, by saying, I don't know when you don't know, and getting in the room with a bunch of other smart people who have different points of view, you can get to the best answers. And if you try to put your ego aside and be open to the input of other smart people, I think you end up getting to the best answers. There's a lot of other good content in there, but those are two things that I really took away from that book.
Okay, let's change things up now. We're going to have as we sort of approach the last couple of minutes, let's get some machine gun style sort of answers back now, Matt, to try and squeeze as much as we can out of this mentoring session. Leadership. Finish this sentence. Leadership is
walking the walk.
Interesting. Okay. What's one aspect of leadership you've struggled with the most?
Delegation, and relinquishing day-to-day control over the work. So as I kind of talked about it earlier, developing the trust in the people who are doing the work on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I get that. Captaining the boat and also, being the cook as well. I can understand that. Most painful mistake. What have you learned from it?
Well, I'd say, I'll spare the specifics, but it's over-promising to a good relationship and then having to walk something back. That's a painful experience. And so my lesson there for folks is just make sure that you are clear on everything supporting your decisions and what you're communicating to your good relationships, because it's a relationship business, and having to walk relationships back or change course after you've communicated something is pretty painful.
Okay. And last question. It might be one of the most sort of important that we've asked. In the introduction, I let the audience know as to who you've worked for. There's some big brands here, big organizations that ultimately you've decided that the time was right then to move on. How does someone right now in the audience know when it's time to show the grit and knuckle down, and how do they know when to cut?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I have spent time at a lot of great companies, and I felt like I looked to leave those companies when I could no longer progress, when my goals were different from the company's goals, and you have to make a hard decision. But my advice would be to be very patient and very thoughtful about making a decision about leaving a company for a new company. It always seems like there may be greener pastures, but real estate's a reasonably small business made up of a lot of small teams. And you never really know what you're getting into until you spend a lot of time with those people. So be very thoughtful about changing, because it's hard to go back once you've made a change.
Right, Matt, we've got to bring this to a close, but thank you very much for joining me. And for anyone in the audience who's listening now, make sure you click like, subscribe, and add in the comments just some of the questions you'd either like to get to Matt, or maybe you want to ask for our future guests. But Matt, thank you very much again for giving up your time for this. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for inviting me.